Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining the first edition of NNIP's Sustainable Investing Summer Course 2022. My name is Joep Huntjens. I'm Head of Asian Fixed Income at NN Investment Partners, and I will be your moderator for today's session. This year's summer course, several leading academics will be sharing their knowledge about some key sustainability trends impacting decisions being made by governments and companies, as well as asset owners and investors. The summer course focuses on fostering the transition towards a more sustainable economy, including some of the governance implications of this transition, and how to navigate some of the short and long-term trade-offs involved in securing a better future. This year, the summer course will be going on tour around the world, and we will be broadcasting our lectures from renowned universities in Europe, the United States, and Asia, where leading academics, such as Professor Edward Freeman from the University of Virginia, Professor Kathy Magaris from Vrije Universiteit Brussels, and Associate Professor Hannes Wagner from Bocconi University will be speaking. Today we are at National University of Singapore with Professor Sumit Agarwal, who I will introduce to you shortly. For those of you joining us for the first time, the summer course is a series of virtual interactive lectures. This year it will run until the beginning of October. Thank you for joining us live today. You will be able to rewatch all recordings at your own convenience later. Let me start by providing you some housekeeping rules. The floor is open for questions. Feel free to send in your questions at any time, and we will gather them up as we go along. Please use the chat function to ask your questions. Also, let me explain how the platform works. Look out for messages in the chat for any announcements from our @NNIP Investment Partners crew. If you're experiencing any technical issues, first try to refresh your browser. That usually does the trick. Should the issue persist, please send us a message in chat by using @NNIP helpdesk. The team here will try to assist you as quickly as possible. With the logistics sorted, let's dig into today's session. Let me welcome Professor Sumit Agarwal, Professor of Finance at the NUS Business School and a Professor of Economics and Real Estate at the National University of Singapore. Welcome, Professor Sumit Agarwal.
Thank you, Joep.
Today, we will talk about the intersection of behavioral finance with sustainability and green finance. I'm looking forward to your presentation and learning more about how the field of green and sustainable finance has been maturing in Asia. I will join you again after the lecture for the Q&A, but until then, the floor is all yours. Over to you, Professor Agarwal.
Thanks again, Joep, for inviting me and for being here for the audience. So let me start by saying I'm a professor at the business school at NUS. I'm also the managing director of this new institute we just started here called Sustainable and Green Finance Institute. So in that capacity, I will try to give you some information on how I think what is happening in sustainable trends in Asia, and then overlay that with what behavioral finance has taught us over these years. So let me start out by just giving you some background. Clearly, we have seen unprecedented climate and social changes over the last 100 years. For instance, there are around 2,000 plus billionaires who have more wealth than 4.6 billion people, or 86% of the wealth created is by the top 1%. Okay? So more than 3 billion people are poor, and this is also amplified with COVID, and many people are living under $5 an hour a day on their living. So these are dramatic statistics that you think about from a social point of view. If you think from the climate or economic, environmental point of view, it's even more disastrous. Carbon dioxide emissions are very high, and they have been rising at 38% higher than expected. We expect that the world temperature to rise by 1.5% degrees Celsius, and climate change and rising temperatures have caused dramatic events around the world. Water scarcity, droughts, we have seen floods, and we clearly will experience sea level rise that will devastate and destroy many major cities around the world. If we think about COP26, they have been debating on how to reduce these things and how to reduce carbon dioxide and other chlorofluorocarbons from the world, and how to bring down the world temperature. Now, these are not easy tasks. If you talk to the ministers of developing countries, for instance, the Indian climate minister, Bhupendra Yadav, said, how do you expect developing countries to contribute to this when we have our own development goals? I mean, we can try to do this, we can try to phase down, but to expect us to phase out carbon dioxide is just deeply harsh for us to expect. So, and he said, I'm very sorry. I mean, this is just unavoidable for us to do. If we actually look at the carbon emissions by the OECD countries and the rest of the world, clearly OECD countries have much higher carbon output per capita than the rest of the world. So their point is that, look, this is not just a problem of India or China. We need to think about what is US and Canada and the rest of the world doing, and that's where the problem lies. Now, it's not that we have not been doing anything. Clearly, we have been thinking about this issue, and countries have been working towards that front. If we think about sustainable finance, I will call it sustainable finance 1, is when companies decided to say, we will care about our bottom line, which is maximize profits and revenues, but we will pay some attention to social and environmental goals. That's what I would call it. They were trying to maximize F, or their financial outputs. If we move forward, if we think about sustainable finance 2, or next stage, we now are saying, okay, we want to equalize all these things, our financial goals and social goals and environmental goals, and that's what we want to maximize in the medium term. But in the long term, clearly the goal has to be that social and environmental goals have to be taking more of a front step than the financial goals of the company. And we expect companies to kind of move in that direction. Now, how do we expect them to do? Clearly, there are lots of things. Just by reducing emission is not enough. You have to actually invest in technology, in green bonds, in social bonds, impact investing, microfinancing. So you have to do a lot through either in the equity markets or bond markets, or whichever market you are in. You have to think about various ways you can actually attain this sustainable finance 3.0, which is impact investing, green bonds, or social bonds. Okay. If we look at the spectrum of investing, we have traditionally thought about the financial investing. That's where most of the financial investors are thinking about. This is mainly trying to make money or higher returns for their corporations. In that, we are trying to carve out this space of social investing, or caring about ESG. But what about impact investing by itself? So it's not just sustainable investing. We have to start thinking about impact investing. And what does that mean? That we have to not just reduce our footprint in companies that are actually having more or darker companies, or companies that emit more carbon, but actually go out and look for companies that are green or blue, and start investing in those companies more directly and having a bigger share of that portfolio. I mean, we can move over to philanthropy. Philanthropy is doing much more in that space. But if we just stay in the blue space on the slide, that's where we need to focus on in terms of the long-term goal of society. Now, we can do this through so many ways. We can promote and accelerate change through financial decisions. There's some research done on that. We can think about providing an effective tool in recognizing the cost and risk in achieving these sustainable goals. So clearly, that has not been done. What are the cost and benefits of this? Essentially, you can think about trade-offs between sustainable investing, the price and risk of these cash flows, and for these valuation purposes, and so on and so forth. Okay. We also then need to start thinking about the rewards for firms that are more sustainable. Thinking about lowering the cost of capital that is due to this superior risk profiles, and so on and so forth. So thinking about the Global Alliance on Banking on Values, they comprise of the 25 most companies that are sustainable, and they are thinking about how to make more green investing and green financing out there. So let me think of the challenges that I envision in the sustainable investing space. First challenge is balancing the interest of various stakeholders. Clearly, there are many stakeholders who are looking for maximum return. And for you want the maximum return, but you also want to do good for society, for the environment and social causes. The second challenge I envision is determining the appropriate investment horizon. What is the right horizon we should be thinking about as society? Measuring corporate sustainable performances. Now, to me, that is the biggest challenge. We have all kinds of ESG ratings and performance scores out there. And there are many, many companies that are actually putting these scores out. But we also know there is greenwashing. We also know this is just typically a variable that people use in measurement. But we need to go beyond just a score measurement. Somebody could actually be saying we are doing a ESG in governance or on social issues, but on the environmental front, they may actually be doing very little. So that's a big challenge to me that number 3 is key. We need to work very hard to make sure we are measuring properly. The 4th challenge I envision is having a universally shared definition of sustainable finance. Clearly, if we move around the globe, from Europe to US to Asia, the definition of sustainable finance and ESG factors change. Within Europe, that definition is also murky, and it depends on time. What time you're talking about it, and whom you're talking about it. Are you talking to politicians? Are you talking to corporations? Or are you talking to regulators? Demonstrating that ESG investments have the same performance as other financial products. I mean, clearly this is an issue. Right now, we don't see the ESG giving that high returns. And part of that is mispricing. The other assets are mispriced because if they were accurately priced for the amount of emission they put out, coal companies or petrol companies, then we will actually price those lower, and then we will have higher returns on ESG stocks. Rising of AI and blockchain tools on sustainability. I clearly see value in actually using technology to actually transition. So we should not think that sustainability is orthogonal to technology. Actually, they can work together. And in most cases, they do work together for us to overcome and achieve our sustainability goals. Let me take a few examples right now and talk about them. So if you think about reduce the social aspect, if we think about reducing global inequality, okay, we need to think about providing microfinance, microcredit, social impact bonds. Those can be very useful in developing societies. Thinking about financial inclusion through fintech. I mean, India just went through a massive project where they actually did financial inclusion of 400 million people and gave them bank accounts. Now, that is a massive project. Many countries around the world, Indonesia has embarked on it, Mexico has embarked on it. So that can be one way to kind of overcome the social aspect. Impact investing, project financing, and obviously corporate social responsibility. Now, we have seen very little on the corporation's part on thinking about social responsibility. I mean, just think about women on corporate boards or women in leaderships in most corporations. They're minuscule, maybe 8 or 10%, whereas the population of women or working women is close to 40 to 50%. So why are we not thinking about corporate social responsibility? Let me talk about this idea of gray stocks. I mean, we have stocks that could have negative attributes, positive attributes. And if you actually have very few negative attributes and many positive attributes, you actually consider that as a good stock. But there could be stocks that actually have many negative attributes and actually many positive attributes. How do we classify those stocks? Let's call them gray stocks. We don't know how to think about it. Should we think about them as sustainable stocks or not sustainable stocks? So it's difficult for individuals and to price them. Clearly, what is happening right now is these gray stocks get underpriced. Here is a simple graph that kind of illustrates that what is happening over in various indices on how we are pricing the good, the bad, and actually the average gray stocks. Now, something like that, if we can fix or actually understand what a gray stock is and how to think about pricing it, we can go a long way. If we think about climate change, clearly, financial solutions can be there. We can think about green or blue securities. We can think about having mutual funds that are focused on these things. Right now, the mutual funds essentially pay lip service to having financial solutions to tackling climate change. They may have one stock that is related to it, but if we actually have an entire mutual fund or family of mutual funds, that will be great. Thinking about green tax policies, carbon trading, which is most countries are talking about carbon trading, but not necessarily doing much to it. Singapore is taking the first step on that, in that direction by actually raising carbon pricing significantly. Catastrophic bonds or pandemic bonds could be other ways of tackling climate change. Here is an example of flow funds and sustainable ratings. You can clearly see here, if you have high sustainable ratings, the flow funds are much higher to those funds, around 24 billion. But if you have low sustainability ratings, you can see negative 12 billion. So if you actually have good sustainable ratings or measurements, funds will flow. I mean, this is like if you build it, they will come. So if you actually have the right measurement on these things, people will buy these stocks. There are lots of things. Singapore's sustainable financial journey. Actually, clearly, Singapore is doing a lot. Climate emergency, sea level rise is one of the big issues in Singapore. Singapore has committed to invest close to $100 billion over the next 100 years to tackle the sea level rise problem. Obviously, resource scarcity, demographic change, which is a phenomena around the world. We are seeing populations are aging, and that is going to impact our way, how we consume, how we save, how we invest. And we will need more investments, and we need more investments that will be in stocks that give higher return in the long run. And I think those long-run stocks should be stocks that are sustainable stocks, not just stocks that are going to give you return in the very short run. You can think about the MAS is actually promoting various regulatory measures to promote Singapore as a leading sustainable financial center. There are lots of things. Even NUS is issuing green bonds to actually most of the buildings that NUS is planning to build in the future will be carbon neutral or carbon zero. So these are the ways we can think about doing this thing. If I think about the long-term sustainability efforts in Singapore, the bigger objective is to reduce the carbon footprint. And within 2005 to 2019, we have seen a reduction of carbon footprint by 26%. That is a big, big goal and an achievement for how Singapore is dealing with this problem of carbon emission. There are many ways we can think about it, how to achieve this. The solutions can range from anywhere from short-term to long-term, and thinking about how to directly reduce carbon and to reduce it in indirect ways as well. So here I talked a little bit to you about all the things that are happening in the sustainability space. Now I want to bring in another thing, which is about financial decision making. Think about, we make financial decisions all the time. Investment is being one of them. For example, eating lunch. Where should I eat my lunch? It's a hawker center or a cafe or a restaurant. Should I be taking Uber or MRT? All these decisions actually relate to my sustainability. Am I taking a public transport? That will reduce my sustainability, increase my sustainability versus if I'm taking on private car. So people actually don't have the capacity to think through all of these. So they typically have heuristics or navigation tools like rules of thumbs or shortcuts in their life to make their life easy. But anytime you're making shortcuts, obviously you're going to make mistakes. Some of those are predictable mistakes. A lot of them will not be predictable mistakes. So for us to understand how we think about this, behavioral finance has come up with many, many, many ways to kind of first figure out what the problems are and then think about the solutions. Now imagine actually we didn't make any mistakes. Then I would not actually need to tell you anything about these slides, because if you were rational and you would have thought through about this, you would have already been buying sustainable stocks. But clearly, we are not buying enough sustainable stocks, and we are still investing in companies and industries that are big polluters, either through environmentally or even socially. Then we need to think about why that is the case. Now, behavioral finance tells us that we fail to update beliefs correctly. We make inconsistent choices. This results in these behavioral biases that we have. Think about, should we really be concerned about this? Clearly, we should be concerned, because if we are making irrational choices, we are going to invest in the short term. We are going to not think about our future. And if we are going to live longer and longer, we may not have enough savings for retirement. Okay? So let me talk about what an average investor is doing. In behavioral finance, the average investor does not expect value of price, okay? Does not know expected value of price, which is true. Most of the investors, if you talk to them, they have no idea expected value of price, okay? May form irrational expectations of their future cash flows, which is true. I mean, if you ask a typical investor, what is your expected future cash flow? they have some inflated returns that they expect that will be coming through them. And I mean, if you typically ask anybody, what do you think your house is worth? They will give you a number that is 1.5 times or 2 times higher than the true value of their house, which is crazy because this is how they value their investments. May have odd preferences, which is consistent. I mean, if you ask anybody on the street, what are your preferences of having today versus tomorrow? Are they consistent? And they're typically not consistent because they may want a piece of chocolate today, but if I tell you, do you want a piece of chocolate in a year from today? They will say, no, I don't want a chocolate because that's harmful for me. Okay, so let me go over some of the behavioral biases. I mean, there are too many. I have no time to kind of go through all of them. So people do not always actually make these decisions rationally. They're not based on probability theory. They're not good at assessing probabilities. If I ask you any simple probability questions, most of you will get it wrong because these are very tough decisions to make. Let me just give you a simple graph. This illustrates very nicely. This graph, essentially these dots, should actually show a linear trend. But you can always take this graph and make an upward or a increasing trend. And if you're an investor, you want to say, oh, my portfolio is doing very well because I invested in tobacco stocks. You can say, look at these dots, and I actually made a curved line, and my stock is doing very well. Alternatively, a pessimistic investor may look at the same dots and plot a graph and say, oh, my portfolio is doing not as well. So I could actually give you the same data, and different investors may actually interpret those same data very, very differently. And this is important for us to understand how investors actually make mistakes, because here's the same data, different investors are using it differently. So some of the behavioral biases that people make, they're overconfident and over-optimistic. I mean, if you ask most people how good of a driver you are you among the top 80% of the drivers? And more than 50% of the drivers will say they are better than the 80% of the driver, which can't be true. So clearly people make mistakes, are overconfident or over-optimistic in their ability to drive. About their judgment, estimates of the outcomes they envision. Their ability to forecast. I mean, most people, if you expect, even investment advisors, if you ask them, where do you think the returns are in the next year? They will tell you the returns we expect will be 15 to 20%. In reality, if you actually can get returns of 5 to 8%, those are pretty good returns. They have these overestimates of their subjective skills or beliefs. So this is about overconfidence and over-optimism. We have familiarity bias. We prefer things closer to us. We actually invest in companies that are either where we work or in the city we live in. Because that is about familiarity. We are familiar with those companies. If you're living in Seattle, you think, I want to invest in Boeing because I know more about Boeing, because I have a cousin working in Boeing. Whereas actually you need a diversified portfolio. You should be investing in companies that are outside. In fact, your cousin most likely does not know much or does not have much information about what Boeing is really doing. So we expect familiar sports team to win. We expect to invest in similar portfolios. The other bias we have is representativeness. We look at small numbers, and we look at these small numbers, and we think these small numbers tell us what the future will be. Small sample bias. We have this hot hand fallacy. If we observe somebody actually hit a three-point shot in basketball, and we ask them, what do you expect the next shot will be? And they say, we expect them to hit another three-point shot, which is the small sample biases, which we should not have. We should actually think we should take a larger sample size and say, look, there's unlikely we'll ever hit a three-point shot again. Disposition. We keep losing stocks, and we keep selling winning stocks. And this is true in the data. If you look at most people keep on holding on to their losing stocks. There are many other biases and frictions. Belief perversion, like reluctance to update our beliefs. Most of us hold on to our beliefs from our very young age. Actually, if you ask them what you believe in, they believe in what their parents taught them or what they learned in school, whereas every day they should be updating their beliefs based on information that they're collecting. Anchoring, we tend to anchor on information that may not be appropriate or may be used by others. Availability bias, we only look at information that is readily available to us, and we use that in making decisions. For example, you may always keep making the same trip to Virginia Beach, whereas you should be saying, no, let me try to explore other places and go and try this. Expert bias, we typically rely on a very few set of experts who give us these subjective beliefs or their own preferences they may have on assessing things. So you can see there are so many. I mean, here I'm just pointing out a few. Actually, experts in behavioral finance have documented more than 110 biases that individual traders or individuals have in decision making. Here is a very simple example of loss aversion. Think about a simple experiment I do with you where I give you a choice. You can take a 50-50 bet, or I can give you $100 for sure or $0. Which one will you choose? The second choice I can give you is I'll give you $50 for sure. Okay, I can give you 50-50 bet or $100 or $0. Choose of those three. Or I can give you $50 for sure. You should choose B. Reflects risk aversion here, okay? If I give you another choice, you can choose a 50-50 bet, or you can have negative $100 or $0. Alternatively, I can tell you, I'll give you negative $50, which means you will have to give me $50. Okay? People will end up choosing C. This reflects they are risk-seeking, because when it is about losses, they are willing to take risk. When it's about gains, they are very risk-averse. Now, this is about loss aversion, that they are averse to taking losses, but when it comes to making money, they are very risk-averse. Okay? There are many experiments I can do. This is another experiment where you can take a 50-50 bet, or I can tell you you can take $150 or negative $100. You should reject G. Okay, this is not a good bet, but most people, if you give these kind of bets, they will start taking the bet here because they are not risk neutral or risk averse. There are other examples of disposition effect, how people actually think about individual stocks on the losses versus gains. People are actually more likely to realize gains quickly and actually hold on to the losses. And this is, again, problems that consumers face. So far, I've presented to you two facts. One is talking about sustainable finance, and the other thing is talking about behavioral finance. And what I've been arguing is that these kind of two things go hand in hand. Individuals routinely make these investment decisions, and they make mistakes when they're making such investment decisions. So my view is that it is important that you actually engage investment managers or actually invest through managers who may also be biased themselves, but at least they have a research team who is being paid a lot of money. Part of it is your money. Maybe 0.5% of your portfolio is going to these investment managers and their research team that will help them make better decisions. And in group thinking, you may actually remove some of these bias I've been thinking about. And hence, this will allow them to think about investing for the long term. And that long term means investing in things that are more sustainable for our future, as opposed to making quick and simple decisions that may be actually not important to you or may not be actually helpful to you if you're thinking about your life cycle and investments that will be useful till your retirement. Thank you. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Professor Agarwal. That was very interesting. I really like the examples where you highlighted how relevant these sustainability aspects have become in investing. And your choice to use examples specific for the Singapore situation made them very tangible to me, and I'm sure that other participants who are dialing in from Singapore find that as well. For the audience, you can post your questions through the chat function. While we wait for those to come in, let me kick off. Professor Agarwal, in your presentation, you described various investor biases, which can result in irrational behavior, such as not choosing the highest expected risk-adjusted return. The objective of sustainable investors is broader than just the financial returns. So have you come across biases that sustainable investors have, which causes them not to take rational decisions in terms of their sustainable objectives?
Oh, many. I mean, look, most individual investors, when they're investing in portfolios, they're clearly not thinking of the long-term returns. If you look at us, individual investment portfolio managers, where they're investing in portfolios that will give them returns quickly, this year versus next year. Because we are human beings. We actually benchmark each other with our friends, and peer effects matter a lot. And most of us will consult our peers and say, oh, I got 7% or 9% or 14% returns. And then they will ask them where you are investing, and they will give them the usual stocks. And those are typically what I will call as, if not gray, but actually darker stocks, which are giving short-term returns. So I think it's true that most people are not thinking about sustainable stocks in their decision making.
Okay, that's clear. Then the other question, do you see a difference in the investment decision behavior made by those investors in Asia compared to those in Europe and the US? Or do investors in Asia have different biases compared to those in the other regions?
So I would think biases are human nature, but I think what is happening is investors in Asia are actually still thinking locally, what is the best local stock to buy? And in that sense, if you're living, say, in Indonesia or in India, the local stocks that you're buying are on average not as clean. In Europe and in America, they have made much more effort to think about or have more guidelines or actually have more ratings on what is an ESG rating or ESG stock versus in Asia. We are still lagging behind on that aspect. So the more effort we put on measurement, the more we will see Asian investors actually move in that direction. So I would say Asia is still behind in that sense, though I would argue Singapore is taking a bigger step in terms of actually making Singapore the hub for sustainable stocks or even doing carbon trading. But we will see how that pans out in the next few years.
Okay. Then another question, have you seen any evidence that companies in this region which are more sustainable also have benefits in terms of funding, such as easier or cheaper access to funding compared to less sustainable peers?
Yes. Now that is due to regulation. Most government regulators or central banks are pushing banks, commercial banks, to have a certain fraction of their portfolio to be in green financing. So that is pushing commercial banks in, say, Singapore and around Asia to say, okay, we need to make green finance. And how do they do that? Maybe green bonds or actually invest in companies that actually have green marks. That could be in real estate, that could be in corporate business. So in that sense, we are seeing a lot of effort by commercial banks in Asia, from Japan to Korea, Singapore, and even developing countries where they are making effort. Though I would argue in developing countries, it's not as much as we would like to see, but clearly every regulator is pushing their companies or their commercial banks to have a fraction or a larger fraction or a growing fraction in this space.
Okay, well, following up on regulation, well, you have shared some examples of how regulation has enabled companies to embed sustainability into their business strategies. Are there also some examples in Asia where it has unintentionally hindered companies?
Oh, clearly. I mean, look, regulation, anytime you bring in regulation, it's a cost. It's a cost to the corporation, and they have to endogenize that cost. And when they endogenize that cost, it will actually hinder their competitiveness, their profitability. And especially if you endogenize this cost for corporations or industries that are more heavy, actually more heavy in fixed costs. So if you're in coal industry, if you're in petrochemicals, these costs become very expensive. And to manage this or manage regulation that is related to sustainability will actually affect your competitiveness. And we see that in many countries and in their ability to actually say, should this project be feasible anymore or not, it's impacting them. I would argue it's a good thing because some of these companies, some of these businesses should not exist in the long run. So if they actually find this as a hindrance, and they cannot sustain or start business, maybe we need to invent technology to improve their working. If we are thinking about coal, how should we make clean coal? Or how should we actually make petrochemicals that actually have less carbon emission? Or automobiles, how should we move away from cars that use petrol to actually hybrids to actually having EVs? And like Hyundai just started a plant in Singapore, which is actually purely an EV plant, and they want to start making it here and exporting it.
Okay, that's quite clear. I see that some questions from the online audience are also coming in, so let's start with the first one. The question is, you showed a list of financial solutions to tackle climate change. So I assume those are the solutions which are already in place. Are there any additional solutions or initiatives currently missing to successfully tackle climate change?
I think the list should be endless. Look, those are just some thoughts that you can think about financial solutions. The climate change problem is not just a problem which the regulators can impose on corporations. To me, the climate change problem starts with the individual, the consumer. Now, if we think about the consumer is making decisions every day on what to eat, what transportation to take, and what utilities to use, how much utilities. Typically, we will actually lower our temperature to 21 degrees and put on a comforter. Right there is a problem of sustainability. And because of that, then that chain downwards happens. We need more air conditioning. As a result, we need companies to produce more electricity. As a result, we need more fossil fuels to generate that electricity. So if we actually can start with the consumer and actually have more regulation on consumers' carbon footprint, first we should just measure their carbon score. Right now, we have no measure of what an individual's carbon footprint is like. If we start measuring that, I think we'll go a long way. Let me give you a very small example of how to do that. Think about the food. The food we consume is a big determinant of our carbon footprint. If we actually think within proteins, if we are consuming beef versus chicken, the carbon footprint we have is around 15 times bigger. If we can actually get people to consume less beef, we can affect the entire chain of events, starting from how much beef is being produced in Brazil and how much of the rainforest we are clearing in Brazil to do that and how much carbon we are emitting as a result of that.
Okay, clear. The next question is, there are many sustainability classifications that consumers face and that investment companies also use. What can be done to navigate these classifications and labels?
Yes. So this is something in our institute, the Sustainable and Green Finance Institute we have set up here. We are mostly focused on thinking about this question. Right now, there is a myriad number of companies that are coming up with measurement tools for sustainability or actually ESG scores. It's very difficult for any regulator, for any investor, for any banker to decide which of these things should we use, which are built by independent parties, which are built by invested parties, I mean, think about, S&P ratings. Before 2006 crisis, we all thought those were great, and they were rating subprime mortgages as AAA. So I think we need to be cognizant of who is coming up with ratings. Are they independent enough? So we want to invest at NUS thinking about coming up with a rating that will be publicly available, very transparent, and when the rating is transparent, then the investor or the banker or the regulator can determine themselves, do I believe it, how much do I believe it, and how should I use it?
Okay. Then we have the next question. Do you feel that regulators do enough to facilitate all the changes we try to achieve here?
Not enough, clearly. The problem is so big, enormous, that regulators are still playing catch-up. Many regulators don't even have a chief sustainability officer. That's the first step for regulators to have is a chief sustainability officer. The next step is to have teeth. The chief sustainability officer, for a regulator, should have enough power to actually impact what investment community, the banking community, and even any other community that they're engaging with can do or cannot do. We lack professionals who actually can work in the sustainability space. Again, we need training. We don't have enough training around the world or enough trained professionals who can work in corporations, who can work in the investment community or the banking community. So the first stage is let's produce thousands of masters or PhD level candidates or managers who can work and think through what are the problems and what are the solutions. So hence, this is the first stage we need. I mean, institutions like NUS is putting an effort towards that, but I will encourage every university around the world to say, look, we should have trained professionals in sustainability so that we can do more.
Okay. I have another question for you related to what you already mentioned during the presentation about India, that it's very harsh what is expected from that country to do. And I think that applies to many emerging countries, that the transitioning away from fossil fuels to sustainable energy can be very challenging to achieve, especially compared to developed markets. You can think about transitioning away from cheap coal-fired power generation in countries such as Indonesia or India, as you already mentioned. That might lead to an increase in poverty in those countries. It could also result in allocation of financial resources to the climate transition away from normal infrastructure investments, and that could delay the development of that country. Do you think we should take those factors into account, that we should give those countries more time to transition compared to developed markets?
I mean, the answer is yes and no. We live in one world. So if we allow these countries to continue to pollute, India or China or Indonesia or any other such country, it's not just impacting those countries, it's impacting everybody. So there is a negative externality they create to the rest of the world. But we can't also ignore their plight, which is that they want to come out of poverty. They want their people. Our social goals should also be equally important than our environmental goals. Just so that we care about the environment, we don't want people in India or Indonesia to be living in poverty forever. So we have to come up with a balance. Maybe we need some striking balance between the time frame we give them to come out of it, or to say, okay, we need in the developed world, we need to come up with advanced technology that these countries can adapt much faster, and as a result, they don't need to invest in such things. I'll give you one very simple example. Look, our entire planet's energy needs can be provided by the sun's energy in 1 hour. 1 hour of sun's energy is all we need for the entire year's energy requirement for this planet. Why aren't we thinking about batteries, battery life, and capturing the sun's energy so that we don't have to rely on fossil fuels that can actually impact our carbon emissions and actually climate change and sea level rises?
Okay, thank you. You also mentioned during your presentation about the gray stocks, the companies with both positive and negative attributes, and how much better they performed compared to other stocks.
Yes.
I was wondering, what do you think that the explanation could be for that outperformance? Are those structural factors, or is that just something which happened over the time that the research was done and it doesn't work anymore?
No, they perform because actually these gray stocks they have some bad attributes, but they also have enough good attributes, and investors actually can see through that these companies may be. So think about a coal plant. Now, coal plant, the variation of grading of coal is huge. Now, a coal plant that maybe in India have huge sulfur contents, may be really bad. Another coal plant in Indonesia may be actually doing very well. So this is where the grayness comes into play. Which coal stock should I buy? Which company where the coal is being produced? Now, if you actually invest enough time to think about it, and you can buy the right gray stock, actually you will see they're actually doing very well, and investors are rewarding them. So, but the problem is most of the investors or fund managers or individual investors don't have the time and energy to look into this. Maybe they don't even have the training. Most of them actually think about just what is my return on the investment, because that's how they get paid.
Okay, good, thank you. We also asked our audience a poll question on LinkedIn. The question we asked was, how do you try to prevent behavioral biases from impacting your investment decisions? Let's look at what the audience voted. A, using AI as part of your decision-making process. B, consulting an external expert. Or C, I do not. Well, the outcome is that most of the respondents believe that AI should be used for the decision-making process. So yeah, there's a lot of confidence in that part. Obviously, the use of AI investment processes has grown tremendously, as has the available data. So I'm wondering what you think about that trend. Is that the right way to do it? But I'm also wondering what you think about the fact that 25% of the respondents don't do anything to mitigate their biases.
So either one of them is not a good outcome. Look, I do believe technology will go hand in hand with sustainability. It's not a substitute, it's a complement, and it's just, technology will help us in attaining our sustainability objective. But investments purely through relying on AI technology is not good enough. We actually do want to talk to investment managers, fund managers, who actually are doing a lot of research to figuring out. Just take these gray stocks. Now, I don't know how an AI will work to figure out which part of the gray stock should they invest in, which part of that portfolio. Also, human beings, fund managers will go and talk to corporate CEOs and learn and read through their prospectus and many other documents. This helps us determine which stocks to invest in. And as long as you as an individual say, this is my objective, I really want to invest in green and blue stocks, the fund manager can take care of it. And if you're doing nothing, that's really not good enough. I just pointed out so many behavioral mistakes to you guys. Please be mindful.
Okay, thank you. I see another question from the online audience. The question is, do you see a difference in responsible investment and impact investment? And if so, what are the different criteria you would name?
So that's a tough question. I mean, responsible and impact, I think the problem is most people do not actually know the difference between what is responsible investing and what is impact investing. The data is not clear. Personally, I have not seen any data to this effect. So I would say I don't know the answer to this question at this point, because clearly there's no data out there that can cleanly tell me how people are performing and behaving.
Okay, thank you. Next question we have from the online audience. What do you feel is the best way to influence consumer choices considering the inherent biases? Do you believe pricing of carbon footprint in consumer products is a key step in reaching our global sustainability goals?
Yes, I think carbon pricing. So I've been thinking about this question quite a lot, and I think if we actually first thing we should do is come up with a carbon scorecard. Just like what we have as a financial scorecard, like a FICO scorecard, we should come up with a carbon scorecard for every individual. And we should actually incentivize people that if you have a lower scorecard, then we will actually give you carbon offset, or your tax rates will be lower. Additionally, what we can say is, look, if you have a lower carbon scorecard, we will allow you to get green financing from banks. Right now, what banks do is they just give green financing to corporations that have some indication that they have a lower ESG score. But we don't know how that ESG score came about, or is it the right measure. Individuals, if we measure it and we can actually use it, that individuals will actually invest more time to reduce their carbon footprint, because they will see the benefit on taxation and the benefit on credit, consumer credit. If I can tell you, you can reduce your mortgage interest rate by 20 basis points because you have a much better carbon scorecard, and that comes because you use public transport, or you're very diligent and using technology, or how you use, what kind of eating habits you have, I think we can save the planet much better by fixing the problems there than worrying about the corporations, because corporations have lots of political economic connections, and they can undercut or get away from paying the true price of carbon that they are emitting.
Clear. Next question from the online audience. Is there value in investing in greener countries through sovereign bonds? How can countries attract more green investment at a sovereign level?
That's a good question. I think individual investors, fund managers should be investing in green sovereign bonds. This not only says that we care, but also sends a signal to countries that are not doing enough to that they should also actually be giving out more green sovereign bonds. I think my personal view is that there is not enough investing in that. Part of that problem could be because countries are not issuing enough those green sovereign bonds. Countries should actually put more focus on that by demonstrating what the bonds that they're issuing are actually green, making it transparent, and investors can learn from it and say, look, I believe in it, I'm going to invest in it.
Yeah. Then we have another question from the online audience. Is environmental and social sustainability feasible given the need to grow GDP, i.e. infinite economic growth with finite resources?
I mean, that's the argument we have been having for the last 100 years. How much do we value our environment, our future generations, versus our utility right now? And I don't think we should be having this debate. Look, we should value our future generations. If that means constraining our utility a little bit, I think that's worth the price to pay. Because we are going to be living on this planet for a long, long, long time as a species. We don't want to have come up on this planet and within the 100 years where we had technology and we are using all these resources that we destroy this planet completely. So I think we should not be having this debate. I think this debate is the wrong debate to have. The debate should be how can we achieve sustainability even if that means cutting down on our economic growth. I actually made a stronger argument to you earlier that even India and Indonesia should be thinking that they don't live in isolation. There are negative externalities of their decisions on the rest of the planet. So even for them, we should be saying, look, you need to do some, but we will be mindful of your long-term growth.
Okay. The next question coming in, how can the disclosure for sustainability be standardized for AI use?
For what use?
AI, artificial intelligence.
Asian countries. Sorry, I don't understand. AI.
Let me repeat the question. How can the disclosure for sustainability be standardized for AI use?
AI use. I think that's a difficult thing. Look, right now we don't have any measure of sustainability. Different organizations, different countries have some way of showing, measuring it. I don't believe most of those measures because I think they're not transparent enough. So first we need to come up with measurements that are completely transparent and built by independent parties. Here I think academic institutions are the right place where such efforts should be put in. And once those are done, then actually technology can take it over and actually use it and actually improve on it and collect data. I mean, this is something what our institute is currently working on, bringing in AI and machine learning to actually build such measurements.
Okay, but one of the issues with data is, as you said, it's difficult. It's not standardized. You also mentioned in your presentation that ESG ratings, you have to be careful using them. You didn't need to do more than just using those ratings. Does it make sense for companies to ensure that they have a good rating? Does it benefit them, or doesn't have any impact on the business?
It should. Look, what I think is because of this lack of standardization, different corporations report it differently. That causes problems in creating these indices, ESG indices. And then you come back to the companies and you say, look, your ESG ratings is not good. They say, oh, we reported it, but we reported it in this variable. And then you say, okay, how do I now fix it to fix your ESG rating? So standardization is important. I think it should be done. Now, the problem is, because there are so many players who come up with these ratings, they say, don't worry. Just give me, and I will come up with a rating for you. Instead, they should put the onus on the regulator, and the regulator should tell all corporations, look, this is the standard format, where your ESG rating, where your information that will be used to construct the ESG rating should be put in. And this is the format, these are the variables, this is the data we'll be collecting. If you do not provide us this data, we'll actually give you a 0 for it, which means your ESG rating will be very poor. Right now, we are not even in that stage. So again, this is something what we are being pushing is to put the onus on the corporation that, look, we will collect as much information publicly and privately available about you to construct an ESG rating for you. But if you don't like it, the formula that we use is public. Tell us where we are wrong and tell us why we are wrong, because if we are not using your data correctly, then please give us the data correctly next time so we can use it and we can fix your rating.
Okay, but so the data at this point of time, it's not very standardized.
Yes.
Does it benefit the companies to have a good ESG rating? Or
yes, it is, because right now the way most companies that build a rating, the way they use it is they say, okay, you claim you're doing ESG, which means we'll allocate a dummy variable 1 to you. If you don't claim anything, we'll give a dummy variable 0 to you. And we'll just use the dummy variable to allocate credit, to do carbon trading, to do any such things for that corporation. Whereas it's a very nuanced problem. It's not just about, do you do some ESG? You may be doing some effort on social, but actually you may be doing negative on environmental. So all those things have to be measured properly on each of these buckets over time, because you may be doing it today, but not doing enough tomorrow. So actually standardizing this will help us go a long way.
Okay, thank you. I see we have another question online. How do you incentivize individual investors to invest more sustainably and somehow correct the bias you mentioned? How can an investor choose the right investment managers, i.e. one with genuine commitment to sustainability?
Yeah, so that's a good question. It's a hard question. Look, first I would say, if you're thinking about doing it yourself, I will discourage you. It's worth to pay a small amount of fee to a fund manager or an institution that actually is thinking about it, and they may actually have a team that may be focused on sustainability or green or blue or social issues. Tell them what your requirements are, exact requirements. The 60% of my portfolio should be in sustainable stocks, and it should be in green stocks, and it should be in these kind of green stocks. Tell them and let them find you the right fund or the fund family where you can invest your money. But that is the way to go. In terms of, can I invest in individually and hope that I will make less behavioral mistakes because I'm investing in green stocks? I doubt it. I mean, human beings are human beings. I mean, I drive my car and I get a ticket every now and then. When I get a ticket, I say, I'm going to feed the meter every time. 6 months later, I forget feeding the meter. I get another ticket. So I will continue to make mistakes. And so all of us will do.
Exactly. Another question we have. One of the key issues you mentioned was deciding on the right horizon to judge an investment. Where do you believe the sweet spot is today?
Well, right horizon, I think that should depend on your life cycle, but clearly you should be thinking long term. You should not be thinking of investments as a 3-year, 5-year horizon. It should be much longer. Even if you're in your 50s, you should be thinking about, when do I need this returns on my investment is when I'm retired. Otherwise, most likely you have a job, you actually earning. Why do you need to cash this out, or why do you need to look over short-term returns on your investment? And you're going to live longer and longer. Healthcare is really good. So you need to think about when you're 70, 80, that you will need this money.
Okay. Clear. Then we have another question. What are your thoughts, opinion of the approach by the ECB and implications for commercial banks plus supply chains, i.e. disclosure based on EFRAG, expectation of carbon footprint, tilting bond holdings?
Yes. So I think ECB has been doing effectively a very good job in thinking about what the carbon footprint will be or carbon requirements should be of corporations. The only thing I would say that they can do more in Europe is the right carbon pricing. Right now, it's just way too low. Even if we are doing carbon pricing at, say, $100, that's still not enough. But they have to be cognizant. Obviously, this is a political, economic decision on how much they can push. I hope in the long run, most regulators will start pushing companies to be in that space of having $100 per ton of carbon emission, as opposed to, say, $10 right now, which is around for most places.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. And the question is it possible for companies to restate the historical sustainability disclosures? Would this not mean greenwashing and divert sustainable investment?
Yes. I think it's a tough thing. We do want them to be able to do this so we can get the data correct first, because we want this data to be there for a long time. But agreed, this will cause, in some sense, another level of greenwashing. I'm mindful of that. But if I think of the long-term benefits of letting them reinstate it one time, I think they may outweigh the implication, and we can actually adjust whatever greenwashing you may end up doing by actually reinstating your numbers. But the problem is right now most companies regularly will reinstate because they know how reinstating will affect their ESG rating, so they know how to manipulate those numbers to get the right ESG rating for themselves.
Okay. So we should be the analysts should be very sharp to look through that.
To be paying attention to these things.
Okay, thank you very much. That's all the time we have for today. I really enjoyed today's session and the passionate way you brought the topic to life. And I'm very confident the audience enjoyed it a lot as well. So thank you so much, Professor Agarwal.
Thank you.
On behalf of NNIP, I would like to thank you all for joining us. We hope to see you again for the next lecture that is scheduled for August the 30th. For the next lecture, we'll head to the Netherlands, where Professor Nancy Bokken will be speaking about the road towards sustainable circular businesses, the challenges and the opportunities. For now, wishing you a good day or a good night, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you and goodbye.